This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, a number of factors help to push MSCI's index of emerging market shares to a fourth straight session of losses today, and that's including a pullback on Wall Street, mixed trade data from China, and of course fears of an escalation in US-China tensions, and that's after news of potential US sanctions against China's biggest chip maker, SMIC. Now, in South Africa, the JSE was a mixed bag today as investors digested all these global geopolitical concerns, coupled, of course, with much worse than expected GDP numbers in the second quarter. Also coming up on today's show, economic output in South Africa shrinks more than 50%. A racist advert forces a retailer to remove Trezam products after protests. And we look at the returnee architect with a plan as Somalia rebuilds. Well, let's start off today's show in South Africa. The country's economy plunged 51% in the second quarter of this year. Now, this was a nosedive from the 2% contraction in the first quarter. Statistics South Africa released the country's GDP data today, revealing a massive slump in activity across all sectors of its economy. Here's Sumitra Naidu with the details.
South Africa's latest gross domestic product figures revealed just how severely the economy was impacted by COVID-19 during April and June this year. The president instituted a hard lockdown on the 27th of March, closing off all borders and economic activity.
This was a really, really big decline, the biggest decline ever recorded for South Africa. And certainly also, I think it's going to take us years to catch up on this. It's probably, we're looking at a period of 4 or 5 years to get back to levels we were in 2019.
9 out of the 10 sectors of the economy declined sharply. Agriculture was the only sector that showed growth. Manufacturing posted the biggest loss of 74.9%, followed by trade, catering, and accommodation that was down 67.6%. No surprise as all movement and tourism ground to a halt.
South Africans at least were fed during the lockdown. So we've seen growth in the agricultural sector because that's the mainstay of food security. So that has shown very positive growth in the process. But also what we've seen is how the labor-intensive sectors have been negatively impacted on. Both mining and quarrying and manufacturing spectacularly dived because of the lockdown.
Economists expect a slight recovery in the third quarter, but that may be muted with increasing power shortages and deepening unemployment.
30% of all adults are officially unemployed, and the broader unemployment number is nearer 40%. We are losing jobs, we know that. It is really a concern, I think, that we have. We have to be very careful how we handle economic policy from now on, and we're going to have to be much more market aware and business aware than we've ever been in our lives before.
Women have been the most affected by the lockdown. Specifically, women have lost their jobs, impacting negatively on various households. Some of the households going to bed without food. So we need to really move speedily to opening up the economy, and in opening it, ensuring that we bring in more women back.
The government provided a $30 billion relief package during the lockdown, but it did very little to protect industry and business. Experts say it will take a few years before we see any real recovery in this economy. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And still in the country, South African retail-led healthcare group Clicks says it will remove Tresemme products from its shelves. This is after an advertisement posted on the retailer's website was accused of being racist. Now, the advert by the Unilever brand showed an image of African black hair, which it described as frizzy and dull, while an example of white hair was referred to as normal. It caused an outcry on social media and sparked protests led by hard-left opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, which of course demanded that stores be shut for at least a week. Now, some Clicks locations around the country remained closed after demonstrators damaged 7 shops the previous day. Clicks has since removed the advert and apologized, as did Tresemme South Africa.
I was actually touched by that because they compared two different things that are not the same. Yeah, so it clearly means that racism won't end.
They are racist towards.
They're not hiding the fact that they're racist towards black people's hair because of the fact that they defined it as bad hair and are defining white people's hair as good hair, as if all hair types are not good.
Well, let's shift focus now. A recent report indicates that African nations lack the fiscal space to respond effectively to the COVID-19 pandemic, especially since more than half were already at risk of debt distress at the beginning of 2020. While initiatives such as the G20's Debt Service Suspension Initiative offer some relief, a report by Scope Ratings suggests that these address liquidity rather than solvency issues. Now, I spoke earlier with Dennis Shen. He's the Director of Sovereigns and Public Sector at Scope Ratings and also one of the authors on this report. And I talked to him about the implications for the continent.
I mean, debt levels are already high in Africa. Even entering into 2020, debt levels had increased, as an average from something like 38 percentage points of GDP in 2011 to upwards of 60 percentage points by 2019. So I think one can imagine that given the global, not only regional, but global severity of this COVID-19 economic and public health crisis, that those debt dynamics from both a public sector debt stock and debt servicing capacity standpoint, it's only made things worse. Of course, that varies by country, depends on the country, and there will be nation states such as Angola or Zambia or Ghana, etc., that have greater duress and or greater debt servicing requirements, including interest payment requirements in 2020 and in the years to come. But nonetheless, as a region, there is both an issue as it relates to liquidity and certainly also in specific African country cases, an issue as it relates to solvency.
Well, what are your thoughts on how multilateral organizations have stepped up? Have they stepped up enough and delivered that required relief for African governments, or are there more efforts needed, in your opinion?
The multilateral organizations have come to the plate. So, I mean, if we're speaking about the World Bank, the IMF, vis-a-vis its rapid credit facility or the rapid financing instrument, the African Development Bank, I think in consortium, the lending and as well as granting of subsidies and grants has totaled for the African continent something to the tune of about 0.6 percentage points of GDP. And naturally, that's in addition to the debt service suspension initiative as coordinated by the World Bank and the IMF, but then of course approved by the G20 and the Paris Club of Creditors to the tune of an additional 0.6% of 2019 GDP. So there is that, and naturally with the debt service initiative, that's also with the Chinese government participating in a global multilateral effort in debt relief, really coming to the fore for the first time, which is a significant development, both in 2020 and in the future years to come. But the measures that have been announced to date, whether grants or loans or whether we're speaking about the debt suspension, mostly address a liquidity problem, mostly address the ability for African governments to be able to bridge a 2020 crisis of a lack of financing and Eurobond funding markets being closed in most cases, address that issue. but the underlying problem of certain governments of having significant debt servicing needs on a year after year basis, that solvency issue in specific cases has been postponed in terms of the redressal of it.
Let's now take a look at our corporate headlines today. The East African Community Secretariat and its partner states have rolled out a regional electronic cargo and driver tracking system. Now, the program, developed through Trademark East Africa, will issue jointly recognized EAC COVID-19 digital certificates and provide a surveillance system to monitor the health of long-distance truckers. It will also enable contact tracing. And South Africa's Shoprite Holdings plans to sell or close its remaining 2 stores in Kenya by the end of December, marking just 2 years since it entered the Kenyan market. This is attributed to the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the move comes amid currency devaluation, supply interruptions, and weak consumer spending in Nigeria, Angola, and Zambia, which have weighed on earnings. And Ethiopia's government is planning to sell a 5% stake in state-owned Ethio Telecom to its citizens as it seeks to break up the monopoly. The government is expected to retain a 55% stake, with the remainder going to international companies. The sale of stakes is part of the government's plan to open up one of the world's last closed telecom markets. And Britain's Gatwick Airport has suffered a $426 million loss in the first 6 months of 2020, and that's due to the global coronavirus pandemic. Passenger numbers have dropped, with the airport prepared for the travel slump to last for years. It is reported that the airport may need to cut 600 jobs to prepare for a smaller travel industry. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, still coming up on the show. Higher electricity prices add on to the pain of the coronavirus pandemic in Nigeria. And Bitcoin gains currency across the continent.
Every story starts out like this.
We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Now, the most active border crossing between Tunisia and Libya has been closed since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. As a result, trade between the two nations has been heavily impacted as trucks carrying much needed supplies have been blocked from crossing the border. Well, CGTN's Adnan Shaushi picks up that story.
Located in southeast Tunisia is Bingerden. It is the main town for cross-border trade with Libya, but some of the areas in the coastal town's open exchange market have been deserted by merchants since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, and as a result, the market has been shut down for over 6 months.
The impact of the crisis is devastating to the local economy. The goods are not available because we cannot receive the supply from Libya. Thousands of people used to work in this market before the crisis. Now it's like a ghost town here.
Mohammed Al-Taib owns an electronics shop in Bingerden. His business was flourishing before the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, but now he's running out of goods and money.
When the border crossing was open, all goods were available and affordable. Now it's difficult to work because the warehouses are empty. We urge the government to reopen the border as soon as possible because the pandemic will not end this year. The businesses cannot support themselves anymore and there will be economic consequences.
All the hotels and the motels in this town are closed. Motel owner Lazhar Barish has seen average daily room rates tumble. Occupancy rates have hit rock bottom as tens of thousands of Tunisian and Libyan traders have not visited the town for months.
The
coronavirus crisis ruined many small businesses. Motels and hotels are shut down while we were unable to pay electricity bills and the additional monthly maintenance costs. Tunisian and Libyan clients are very rare to find. When the border is closed, the whole economic activity in the city is dead.
Some 300 trucks are queuing on the border between Tunisia and Libya. Traders are hoping the border crossing will reopen in the next few weeks. Experts assert that businesses in the border town of Bingerden have lost millions of dollars in revenue due to the interruption of the normal trade activity with Libya. Local authorities say thousands of people have lost their jobs since the outbreak of the pandemic in March. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria, citizens are criticizing a directive to raise electricity prices. They have now risen by up to 100%. The government says the move is to curb costly subsidies in the power and petroleum sectors. It also says it has spent almost $4.43 billion supplementing a tariff shortfall so far and needs to reform those sectors. While CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reports that the hike has made worse an economic slowdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Metal fabricator Colin Semodi is recharging his electricity meter for the second time today. Like several other small businesses, his welding business relies heavily on electricity. Before the implementation of the new tariff hike, he used to spend an average $5 on electricity daily, but that was barely enough to deliver on a job. Now the new tariff, which has been defended by the Nigerian government, is twice as much and is a major cause of concern to small businesses like Collins.
I used to consume electricity if I have a good job at hand. But the situation on ground now is not sweet, it's not palatable at all. Reason because of the high increase of electricity, which I cannot do anything with this because they have been preaching we should get meter. I got one now. But buying credit, I cannot even use 2,000 naira to deliver a job of 20,000 naira. Immediately you buy credit of 2,000 naira, it's off because the height is too much. If there's something they can do, they should do because they encourage that we artisans should go out to get something instead of being idle.
Consumers' electricity bills have risen by 90 to 100% and in some locations even higher. For instance, the new tariff was increased to 62.33 naira from 30.23 naira for a kilowatt unit of energy per hour.
First is that people cannot be paying for even darkness. That's even the starting point. Because it's not as if you have availability of electricity. We are being forced to pay for more money for electricity, which does not exist. So its implication, it does not need a soothsayer or to be a wonderful economist to understand. Even starting from the working people, whose their salary is static, and we have to pay triple, because that's what it means, 22 to 60, is about 3 times on electricity, which is a necessity for a life.
The hike is coming amid an economic downturn fueled by the coronavirus pandemic. There's heightened concern this move could push inflation to as high as 18%, making the cost of living even higher for ordinary Nigerians.
The corona pandemic had crippled the economic situation of the country. Many people have lost their means of livelihood. Many people's income have become shrink to the point that they can barely survive. And it's at this period of time, any hike, as we are seeing the current hike in electricity, mean that it will not only destroy the remaining flesh that the economy has, but will destroy the entire nation completely. Because this means that the recession will last longer because many businesses will close down as a result of not being able to meet operation costs.
Nigeria's current electricity generation capacity still hovers around 12,500 megawatts, but only 60% of that is transmitted. This is grossly inadequate, as more than 40% of the nation's 200 million strong population are currently cut off from the national grid. Erratic supply has forced many homes and businesses to rely on generators as an alternative power source. The situation is worsened by a recent hike in fuel price. There aren't many options left for small business owners like Collins, but the Electricity Regulatory Agency insists that the new tariff would yield a more stable power supply. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, a boom for Bitcoin in countries across Africa is quietly gathering pace. There is data suggesting that cryptocurrencies are finding a practical use, which they have failed to do elsewhere. Now, at the heart of this boom is Nigeria, with a growing population, hungry to avoid the established means of sending and receiving money.
4 months ago, trader Abolaji Odunjo made a big shift in his business at a frenetic Lagos street market. He started paying his suppliers in Bitcoin to ease doing business.
We trade with Bitcoin, which is a very easy way of doing business. Because with Bitcoin, you don't have to pay charges. You don't have to buy dollars. You don't have to convert your naira to dollar before you buy. Because you are buying directly. When you buy in Bitcoin, you are buying directly in dollar and you send through dollar.
Reuters interviewed Bitcoin users across 5 African countries from Nigeria to Botswana to flesh out some data identifying remittances from migrant workers back to Africa and payments from small businesses as drivers of the boom. Apparently, transfers by individuals and small businesses, those under $10,000, jumped 40% from July 2019 to $315 million in June, according to US blockchain research firm Chain Analysis. And the ingredients of the boom? Young, tech-savvy populations that have adapted quickly to Bitcoin.
It is a major investment because Bitcoin keeps getting higher every year. And so people are seeing it as an investment opportunity, making the switch. And then also there is the ease that sending money or doing transactions in general with Bitcoin brings.
Cryptocurrencies are helping people make their business work quicker, smoother, and become more profitable.
With Bitcoin, everybody can tap into the world of finance with just your phone, your mobile phone, and an internet connection. So looking at everybody on internet right now, we have more than about 3 billion people online. So it means that if everybody is well informed, 3 billion people can tap into the world of commerce.
Many investors see Bitcoin price as tied to its integration in the real economy, something it has largely failed to achieve.
Bitcoin trading and cryptocurrency trading in general is still a relatively minor pursuit in Nigeria, though of course it is growing fast. And this is a worry potentially for individuals at least, if not for the wider economy, that they could end up with losses because Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies do fluctuate in value enormously over time.
Even as usage widens in Africa's economy, risks abound for its growing army of crypto users as Bitcoin legal status is unclear in many countries. Back in 2018, Nigeria's central bank said cryptocurrencies were not legal tender and the dealers and investors were not protected by law. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And in Egypt, flights between Cairo and Moscow will resume mid-September. This, of course, is expected to give Egypt's hard-hit tourism sector a major boost. Of course, Russia is an important source of tourists for Egypt, with data showing that approximately 3 million Russians visited the country in 2015, which was one of its best years in the country's history. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the story.
It's been long overdue, and the announcement heralds positive news for Egyptian tourism industry. Russia has been by far Egypt's largest client in recent years. It had been sending an average 3 million visitors per year until 2015, followed by the UK with 1 million tourists. The North African nation had attracted 15 million visitors a year just recently, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, only 170,000 have arrived so far since travel restrictions were lifted. And resuming Russian flights could be the turning point needed to lift the ailing sector.
There has not been a direct flight to Egypt from Russia since October 2015, after the Russian plane crashed over the Sharm el-Sheikh. About 100,000 Russians arrived in 2019 through other destinations, but not directly from Russia. Resuming direct Russian flights sends a message to the rest of the world that Egypt is safe and secure to visit and adds credibility to the industry.
Since the Russian travel ban, authorities here have worked around the clock to provide the proper security procedures in airports and hotels that would satisfy the Russian inspection teams.
This was very important. After 2015, Egypt embarked on a major security overhaul in its airports and resorts. Inspection teams came from many countries to oversee the security situation and were happy with what they witnessed.
Officials also showcased their health and safety standard procedures to protect tourists from the COVID-19 pandemic.
There are very serious hygiene and safety measures, starting by the beginning of the trip to Egypt, in the airport outside Egypt, on the plane, upon the arrival to Egypt, on the check-in procedure in the hotel. I think that only in Egypt you can find this weather, this sun, these beaches, with social distancing and respecting this very and extremely well-established hygiene and safety measures.
And it's not only Russia that has provided a positive feedback. The latest improvements have also been commended by one of the world's top international authorities on tourism.
Egypt is ready, and Egypt is more than ready, sanitary and protocol way to receive international visitors. Resort is free of COVID, let's say, and it with sanitary and control.
For now, the deal will see 3 flights ply the route to Cairo per week. But officials hope this would gradually increase and lead to the influx of Russian visitors and ultimately kickstart a badly needed recovery to the tourism industry. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, still coming up on the show. Autonomous vehicles take the limelight at the International Trade in Services event in China. And a ride back in time through the London Concours d'Elegance.
Holding guns, machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
How will your world change today?
What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
At 6:30, here's a recap of other headlines. The army in Somalia says they've killed 14 al-Shabaab militants. That's following an attack by the al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group in the town of Balad, just north of the capital, Mogadishu. Now, a government soldier also died in the attack, while 7 civilians were injured. Meanwhile, over 350 people in eastern Uganda have been left homeless after their houses were destroyed by heavy rains. Authorities are concerned that seasonal rains will cause more displacement. And the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, has given the military junta in Mali 1 week until 15th of September to name a transitional president and prime minister. At a summit in Niger, West African heads of state said leaders of Mali's transitional government should be civilians, while the bloc has maintained sanctions against Mali but welcomed steps taken by the junta in the past week to start talks with political parties and civil society groups. And finally, Beyoncé's visual album, Black is King, has received mixed reactions across the continent. The production is a spin-off from Disney's popular animation, The Lion King. It celebrates Black history and culture at a time when racial issues have been thrust into the spotlight through the global Black Lives Matter movement. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. And now let's shift our focus to international news. The European Union wants to reposition its economy to become more independent from global powers in the production of medicine and processes. Now, this comes after EU countries expressed concern over supply chain after the COVID-19 pandemic shut down many production sites in China. Now, these sites make up 80% of the raw materials, or rather they make 80% of the raw materials for active agents in some drugs or components for the car sector.
European strategic autonomy, I repeat, European strategic autonomy, these are not just words. The strategic independence of Europe is our new common project for this century. It's in all our common interest. 70 years after the founding fathers, European strategic autonomy is goal number 1 for our generation.
And in China, it has been day 5 of the China International Fair for Trade in Services in Beijing. And financial services took a center stage this time. Nearly 150 financial institutions are participating in this year's event. About a third of them are foreign companies. Now, they're expanding in China as the country pursues more opening up in its financial sector. Chinese officials announced that there is nothing left on the negative list for the finance sector. More than 40 foreign-funded institutions have entered China since the country lifted restrictions on foreign shareholders in the sector. Now, the firms include names like MasterCard, Fitch, S&P, as well as Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse. And moving on, autonomous vehicles are on full display at the services fair. Analysts are saying the rise of vehicle automation will reshape mobility by emphasizing the value of services instead of the hardware or the vehicles themselves.
And off they go, steady, composed, and cautious. Meet the self-driving vehicles at the China International Fair for Trade and Services.
So right now we're sitting in the Apollo minibus. This is an autonomous vehicle developed by the Tsinghua School of Vehicle and Mobility in conjunction with Baidu. This is a very advanced autonomous vehicle. It's got intelligent cameras, it's got LiDAR, it's got radar, so it has very strong environmental perception abilities. What separates this bus from other autonomous vehicles is the coding. The algorithm is highly advanced. The sensors, the hardware, that is the same across the world, but it really is the coding that makes this bus stand out from the crowd. It's got no steering wheels. Of course, it's very comfortable as well with air conditioning, so looking forward to enjoying a ride in the Apollo minibus.
McKinsey says China has the potential to become the world's biggest market for autonomous vehicles. It estimates that nearly 2/3 of passenger kilometers traveled in China by 2040 will be in self-driving vehicles, generating $2 trillion in combined revenues from mobility services and the sales of autonomous cars. For pedestrians, a future with self-driving cars could also mean a future of safer roads.
The core technology of self-driving cars is their ability to percept the environment, including high-precision positioning. This car is equipped with satellite navigation, radar, and visual equipment. The car is also adopting an intelligent decision system to help protect pedestrians and handle some complex situations.
All right, moment of truth. Let's see how safe autonomous vehicles actually are. I'm going to try standing in front of it and see if it stops. Voila, it stopped. Very safe. So within a safe distance, it actually can percept people in front of it and it stops.
Here in Beijing, over 500 kilometers of roads are dedicated to autonomous driving, the most of any city in China. The country's policymakers have set 2025 as the year in which China will produce driverless cars of conditional automation in scale. Conditional automation is when a car can control speed and steering simultaneously, but a human driver will still need to be ready to take over in difficult conditions. China's cities are dense, its roads complex, making it the perfect training grounds for self-driving cars. Its consumers are fast adopters of technology, and with China's leadership in 5G, commercialization of autonomous cars could come faster in China than expected. Michael Wong, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Chinese companies are in a rush to go public this year, with the number of initial public offerings already close to a 10-year high. Most of the companies are from innovative industries and are taking advantage of reforms in China's stock markets. Here's CGTN's Chen Tong with the details.
Despite economic pressures of the COVID-19 pandemic, Chinese firms are charging into the capital markets in almost record numbers. More than 200 companies have launched on the Asian market this year, almost double last year's figure. And they are getting plenty of investor support. More than 308 billion yuan so far, up nearly 140% year-on-year. Industry insiders say a major factor behind the listing craze is the country's registration-based IPO reform.
The IPO process on the STAR market has been very smooth this year. The finance raised on the STAR is more than that of the main board. And the China Next board has launched its registration reform, which sped up IPO interest there.
Experts' analysis is reflected in the numbers. As of September 2nd, 119 IPOs had been issued under the registration-based system, either on the STAR market or on the China Next board, and they account for more than half of all IPOs this year. The registration system will considerably liberalize the registration requirements, and so most of the firms taking advantage of it are young and in emerging industries.
The COVID-19 pandemic is actually shifting investors' attention to biotech firms and emerging industries.
With both regulators and investors becoming accustomed to the new system, experts believe the rush to the markets will continue.
With the registration-based Chinex becoming more mature and more reforms taking effect, SMEs are on a position to benefit. I think IPOs on the Chinex will be the major focus in the second half of the year, while IPOs on the A-share market and the total financing allocated from the IPOs will continue to increase.
The IPO approval rate is also on the rise. In the first 8 months, 324 companies' IPO applications were approved, bringing the approval rate to almost 95%. That's 10 percentage points higher than in the same period last year. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
And now for a look at the airline sector. Fresh data from the International Air Transport Association now shows that demand for air travel continues to lag well behind the same period last year, even as lockdowns are easing. It has been a different story for the private air travel sector, though as it's recovering from the pandemic at a much faster rate. CGTN's Guy Henderson reporting.
This is one way to travel safer during the pandemic, for those who can afford it. Straight through Biggin Hill Airport's sanitised private terminal and into the cabin, where even the pilot's cut off from the passenger by a perspex shield. Far fewer touch points than public transport, no rush hour up here.
So this is what the daily commute would look like for some amongst the super rich before the pandemic. London is just a 6-minute flight away from here. Over the last few months, of course, there's been far less need for that kind of traffic, with so many of us working from home. But still, private air travel has held up pretty well.
This company mostly does link flights, picking up wealthy clients at the end of a longer haul private journey.
Yeah, so this is a AW109.
Demand fell during lockdown as jet travel eased, but has since come back reasonably strong, though travel patterns have shifted significantly.
Where things have changed now, it's a lot of leisure travel compared to business travel. So where quarantines come in, we've seen a decrease in jet traffic. Not so much now, but in the last 3 months. And since then, it's been a lot of private houses, going down to Cornwall for vacations and things like that. A lot of going to Scilly Isles as well. So Tresco Island has been a really popular staycation.
That fits a broader pattern these last few months of the affluent going private as they head on holidays. Overall demand's still lower than last year, but it's bouncing back far quicker than for crisis-hit commercial airlines. In Europe specifically, it's been a bumper period.
The rate of recovery is slowing, but there are some variations regionally, because August has actually seen more BizAv activity, business aviation activity in Europe, in 2020 than in 2019.
Air Charter Service is one of the big private aviation players globally. Even during lockdowns it saw spikes in demand as governments tried to get their citizens home or as emergency supplies were sent around the world. Now it's hoping to keep hold of some of those new users.
We had a 258% increase in inquiries in the month of July, and 93% of those were coming from first-time customers. And in fact, of all of our bookings in July, 44% of them were coming from people that had never used private aviation before. So there's a real kind of change in the dynamics of the market.
The coronavirus has been wreaking havoc on most of our travel plans in recent months. As long as that continues, a fortunate few may keep looking to alternatives. Guy Henderson, CGTN, Biggin Hill.
Now, the coronavirus pandemic has kept people indoors and theatres dark for months now. It has also caused Britain's arts sector to rethink its future, as there's no return to past normality in sight. Holly Hudson has that story from London.
For months, stages in the UK have been empty. From theatres to museums and galleries, the arts and culture industry collapsed with the outbreak of coronavirus. Holly Beasley-Garrigan is a respected performer with more than a decade in the business. She went from actor to cleaner, swapping the stage for a hospital for now at least, and is retraining as a health professional.
I had a big Arts Council bid in, and the whole year was gearing towards redeveloping this solo show and then performing it in Edinburgh and then going on to tour and developing new work and all of those things that come with that, and then that all got cancelled.
The much-hyped government bailout of the arts in July promised the biggest ever one-off investment in UK culture and support when it was needed most. But most involved are still weeks, if not months, away from seeing any money, according to recently published funding criteria. For those who rely on live performances to make a living, the industry is operating at a fraction of its previous capacity. Across the UK, some indoor performances have been allowed since the 15th of August, but with all audience members having to maintain social distancing, theatres are operating at a vastly reduced capacity, and many say that just isn't financially viable. For more than 200 years, the Theatre Royal in Bath has been hugely popular with locals and tourists alike. But with no return to past normality in sight, they're now having to rethink their future.
If we do plays, we do big glossy productions with big stars, the tickets are expensive, and we need a high capacity. There's a whole other range of theatre which is smaller cast plays, not necessarily big expensive stars, not necessarily with lavish scenery, that are perfectly wonderful evenings in the theatre, and I believe our audience would rather have shows like that than no shows at all.
Here outside the Tate Modern, protesters are fighting for their jobs over plans by Tate Enterprises, Tate's commercial subsidiary, to cut more than 300 posts.
The bailout funding that government gave to the cultural sector, we understand Tate is receiving $7 million of that. We're asking for 10%. We know it won't save all of our jobs, but what it does is it doesn't allow the cuts to be so deep. If that money isn't enough, then they should be more vocal in asking the government for more money in order to save jobs as well.
In a statement, Tate Enterprises said they have worked hard to keep as many jobs as possible, but said the job cuts are necessary because of the loss of revenue during lockdown and the dramatic drop in footfall in our galleries since reopening. With thousands of potential redundancies having already been announced, many fear thousands more in the coming weeks. Holly Hudson, CGTN, London.
Now, if there is any indication that something is returning to how it was before the pandemic, perhaps a vintage car show at Hampton Court Palace near London is one of them. Now, the 2020 Concours d'Elegance is a 3-day gathering of classic cars to show them off, as well as an auction to see how much COVID-19 has affected sales. CGTN's Lolo Ayolo Ap Defied has more from London.
For collectors and car enthusiasts, this is what a dream looks like. Vintage and classic cars on show and a live auction during the event.
Classic cars to me are a passport to experiences. They're all about the memories that you make with them, the places you drive them to, the concours where you share them with other owners and with the wider public. And definitely an event like this is an opportunity for me to come out and see old friends and meet new friends as well.
These are in a different league to modern ones. 80,000 fewer new cars were sold in the UK this year, according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. That's down on last year because of lockdown. These cars are all from one collection and could fetch $66 million through an American firm in its first live auction in the UK.
Certainly, we're not immune from the effects of the pandemic, but it's interesting, especially at the very top end of the market, which is what we specialize in. The market seems to be quite active and alive and well. Of course, we'll see, because we're having our first live auction since the pandemic, but it'll be a very good test of the market to see where things are.
This Aston Martin could sell for more than $10 million. The Bugattis could also be in the same price range. Hampton Court, once a palace for Henry VIII and a few of his wives, is now home for 3 days to 1,000 cars. Many are eye-wateringly expensive and use high-octane petrol at a time when attitudes towards pollution are changing.
We know that the world is divided. We're aware, I've got young children, we're aware of pollution, and I think that the time will come where, the use of petrol cars in inner cities will get restricted. But it's a big world and there's lots of open roads.
The look of a car and their sounds are reminders of a bygone age. Most of the cars here are to be shown, not to be sold, but auctioneers say that of the 24 or so cars which are being sold, most of the buyers will be online. And it seems that despite COVID-19, the value of these classic cars keeps on increasing. Concerns about a pandemic or climate change doesn't seem to shake the value of vintage cars or dampen the enthusiasm of their owners. Yolo Ap David, CGTN, Hampton Court, Surrey.
On that note, let's take a look at how commodity markets performed today. Oil prices falling below $42 a barrel. That's as global Brent crude benchmark. The global Brent crude benchmark is currently trading quite deeply in a bearish pattern. Now today saw its fifth session of declines, pressured by concerns as to whether a recovery in demand was strong enough. Meanwhile, gold prices slipping today, weighed down by a stronger dollar. However, its decline was limited by the growing fear over the global economic recovery. Of course, traders say the safe haven metal was still heading for a 4-week low, as of course that gold rally is starting to look tired and ripe for correction. Let's take a short break now, still coming up on the show. We look at the Somalia architect who's back home with a plan as the country rebuilds. Now, horticultural exports in Tanzania, such as fruit, vegetables and flowers, have increased dramatically over the last 15 years. Last year, the industry exported products worth almost $800 million. Well, CGTN's Isaac Lukanda reports that it is helping to drive the growth of the agricultural sector in the country.
In Tanzania, sales of flowers, vegetables, fruits and spices have been rising. In 2004, the industry was worth $64 million. Last year, it made $779 million. The Tanzania Horticultural Association says that new investments are fueling that growth.
Significant increase, investment expansion by the private sector and especially our local farmers. And this is what also we could actually attribute the export increase to that. We are seeing new companies coming in, new farmers joining the sector. And of course, they are also adopting technologies and innovation. And so the productivity is also increasing.
Over 90% of what is produced is consumed in the region of East Africa and Southern Africa. Other exports find their way to Europe and the Middle East. Success in the subsector is drawing more and more farmers into horticulture.
When I farmed ordinary crops like maize and potatoes, I would use a large amount of capital but would yield little in profit. But ever since I got into growing avocados, there is a major difference.
Agriculture as a whole is the mainstay of the Tanzanian economy, employing 68% of the workforce and contributing 31% to the country's GDP. According to the Tanzania Horticultural Association, there are over 4 million large-scale, medium and smallholder farmers engaged in horticulture in the country. Growth in the sector in recent years has helped boost incomes for farmers and the wider Tanzanian economy. But COVID-19 made exporting horticulture more challenging.
Getting the produce to the market in its quality and freshness is critical. So we will continue enhancing our logistics support services and system just to make sure that whatever is produced here in Tanzania can actually get to the market timely, but using reliable support service and system.
The Tanzanian government says it is keen to unlock the potential of the horticultural industry. It plans to grow the industry to $3 billion in the next 5 years, and in the process, grow a better future for Tanzanian farmers. Isaac Lukanda, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Now, Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, is a city of ruined glory. It's once pleasant cultural structures and cathedrals, and now in ruin following decades of civil war and insurgency. But one man, an architect, has returned to his homeland with a plan to rebuild this once vibrant city. CGTN's Terry Wangari has his story.
Italian Somali architect Omar Degan was born in Italy to Somali parents who left just before the civil war broke out in 1991. He studied architecture in Italy and Hong Kong before returning to Mogadishu in 2017. He founded Do Architecture, which is a company that specializes in post-conflict reconstruction. Just as the government reopens national relics, it opened the National Theatre in July and the National Museum.
We are now the cultural center, which was inaugurated in 1965-67, and we are surrounded now by the National Library, the National Museum and the National Theatre. So this public space, or these roads around us, they have a deep meaning because they are the center of the culture. So the idea, and I think that in the future we may be able to reach that, is to create a walkable space all around the area and give the possibility to the audience not only to experience these cultural buildings, but also the whole experience of walking around.
But repeated insurgent attacks mean citizens cannot just wander in and out. Security has to be tight. Al-Shabaab still mounts attacks in the city. Degan wants the government to set aside some of the city's rapidly vanishing land for public spaces where families can gather in the evening.
Public spaces, especially in a post-conflict reconstruction context, it means a lot because it really helps the people to take ownership of the spaces that they have. So a public space, it reduces the inequality, it makes the people equal, the better if they are no matter the gender, age, and sex. So at the end of the day, having a public space will help the reconciliation and the peace that the Somalia need and is looking for.
Degan is concentrating on smaller projects, some of which he does pro bono. He's designed a school with gardens in central Somalia and a public library in the town of Las Anod. Designed a school and library for free.
When we designed this space, the main idea was to maintain the cultural identity and giving a touch of heritage and at the same time give the contemporary of the design. So as we can see here, we use the traditional mawis, which is the skirt of, if we want to, the Somali man.
Before Somalia's civil war, Mogadishu was dotted with parks and libraries. Today, the sprawling city of 2.6 million people has no public spaces, only the beach. A building boom has seen the construction of multiple hotels, commercial buildings and houses in the capital.
Designing architecture and do architecture in Somalia is extremely complicated because the people doesn't see that as a need or a necessity, but it's actually very important.
In a city defined by war, Degan wants to place Somali culture and tradition at the heart of reconstruction and peace-building efforts. He's part of an influx of young diaspora Somalis returning home to rebuild their country. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
And before we go, a quick look at Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand falling to a more than 1 week low, nearing 17 rand per dollar today. That's after data showed that South Africa's economic collapse in the second quarter was worse than feared. Of course, we saw GDP in the second quarter fell at an annualized rate of 51%, the worst on record. In Nigeria, despite the CBN's resumed sales of foreign exchange, we saw the naira depreciate to 445 naira per dollar, then stabilize to 440 at the parallel market. In a sharp contrast, the exchange rate at the official NAFEX window hovered at around 382 naira per dollar. Well, that is it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.